Hello.
Go ahead. There's, Welcome, everybody. You're in track 2. This is Bill Mathews. Winter is coming, cloud security and dark ages. As soon as this is over, we're going to have Lockport afterwards. Don't forget there's lockpicking outside, and welcome, Bill. Thank you. Yay!
All right, I'm going to warn everybody ahead of time. This is my first public presentation in a really long time, so it's probably going to suck. Just putting it out there. So just by way of introduction, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Thanks. My name is Bill Mathews, as he said. I'm the co-founder, co-owner of Hurricane Labs. I've been doing general IT stuff for about 20 years, specifically in security about 15 years. I've done quite a few of these talks, and around this stuff I recognize at least some of you, especially the guys that work for me up front. They're here. My geek cred is I like comic books a lot, and I like computer junk, and that's pretty much the entire scope of my geekness. So why I'm here today is to talk about, well, cloud security, obviously, but more importantly, what I'm trying to do is kind of start a discussion, because what I said on a panel about a year ago at, I think, the Information Security Summit, and then I did another one at a smaller event. They might have sponsored that one too. And one of the questions, well, two of the questions I asked, one was, how many people are using cloud stuff in their organizations? And everybody's hand went up, like all the security people. Yeah, we're using it. Yeah, okay, great. How many of you actually have deployed something on the cloud or have done something in the cloud? And like 5 hands went up out of like a crowd of 100. So that struck me a little bit that security people, and again, I think all of you in here know that we're like this. I mean, we're all like this. I'm like this too, by the way. So I'm not up here saying I'm better than everyone else, because I'm exactly like this. You hear something new, some user is like, hey, I want to do that. And you go, oh my God, that's the worst idea ever. You don't know anything about it. You know nothing about it. It doesn't matter. It's the worst idea because some user wants to do it. So why I care about the cloud is specifically my users, in my particular case, my users are my customers. Your users, in some of your cases, or a lot of your cases, are your users, your actual users. They're using this stuff. They're not waiting for permission. And again, it depends on how you define the cloud and all that stuff. So that's why you should care about it, because they're using it, again, whether you like it or not. So when I first wrote this article. It was published a couple of days ago, and I loathe top 10 lists, probably like most of you guys do. So this is not a top 10 list. Top 10 lists assume that you have this magic knowledge of all the things in the universe, and now you can categorize and boil them down into 10 things that are horrible and terrible. So this is not a top 10 list. It also makes me turn green with rage. But it's an easier way to break things down and kind of, talk to your users about it. And really, that's what this talk is about. This talk is for you guys, for the information security professionals, but it's more for you to go back and talk to your users and discuss things with your users, preferably in a non-confrontational manner. I know we're all really good at that. So what I wanted to do was provide a basic framework for discussion, so that, when we're talking to users, we're not going, but the CIA triangle and 10 million other acronyms they don't care about. They just don't care. They want to know, how can I get the stuff that I need, and how can I get it quickly, and all of that. Most of these lessons will apply to your public cloud, your private cloud, and we'll talk about those concepts later. So most importantly, though, why did I do this talk? Well, I did it because your users are using this stuff. They don't care what you think. They don't care how you feel. They don't care that you think it's just a gimmick. And we all do. I mean, we all go, cloud. When I put together the presentation, I'm going, nobody's going to come to this because nobody cares about the cloud. But you really should. And again, I know it's a gimmick. You know it's a gimmick. You guys know you should be doing the same kinds of security stuff in the cloud that you're doing on your regular stuff. Well, hopefully you're doing on your regular stuff. And the point of this presentation is to talk through some of that stuff and make sure your users understand that, you know, it's not a free-for-all. It's not the Wild Wild West. You can't just throw any crap up there and hope it sticks, because it's not going to stick. It's going to break. It's going to break horribly. So we'll start with control panels, which is one of my favorite particular pieces of technology because they can go a lot of different ways. They can be good, they can be bad, they can be very, very ugly. And one of the things with control panels, this is the way you talk to your quote-unquote cloud. They range from very, very good, like Amazon's is fairly good, to Google's, which is fairly archaic. And Google, you know, they have a very simple philosophy about interface design. Keep it very simple. And sometimes simple means ugly, and simple means complicated. It turns things around because they'll use a computer science. I was taking a Google course on power searching because I wanted some of my guys to take it, so I wanted to make sure it was okay. They use terms like phrasal synonymity, something like that. Nobody knows what that means. And so the problem is they use that in their interface too. So if you ever go to Amazon's cloud storage, they use terms like, this is your disk, this is your that. Google used terms like, this is your block device, and you need to, you know, partition correctly and format. Users don't care. They don't want to do all of that. So, and if you want a lesson on why Google's cloud initiatives aren't working, that's why. Their infrastructure as a service, their platform, it's too complicated. Amazon has dumbed it down for users. You know, as a user, I can take my wife who does not like computers and could care less. I could take her and have her deploy a cloud app in a day. And if you need another reason why you should care, that's why. Because your vice president of nothing technical can go deploy some cloud apps for you. That's why you should care. I'm not saying he could do it well. I'm not saying it's going to be correct, but he could do it. Amazon has made sure they can do it. So control panels, like I said, they vary by provider. They also vary by what services you have. So for instance, I'll talk a lot about the Amazon one, mainly because they're the 800-pound gorilla in this game, and also because it's the one we use for one of our cloud apps. It's very, very good. It's very robust. And what's nice about it is if I don't have a particular service, if I'm not using it, Amazon just doesn't show it to me, so I don't get confused. So once you add the service, so if you're using their S3 routing stuff, once you have that service, then all of a sudden, poof, everything, you know, it shows up. But if you don't have it, you don't get it, and life is good. Some of the other ones cloud that a little bit. They confuse it. You have this like really complicated interface, and you can't do anything with it. Microsoft. I'll talk a little bit about Azure, but not a lot, because quite frankly, I don't think anybody uses it, but that might just be my opinion. Control panels can be very, very granular. The ones that are very, very good are usually a mixture, but a lot of them are granular, so you can get down to like you know, really, really interesting details. Like I want to, you know, if you're using Amazon's load balancer, for instance, you can, you know, tell it where you want traffic to go, and you can, you know, be very creative about your routing infrastructure and things like that. So in that respect, they're very, very good. That can be dangerous because you can get, you know, somebody that really doesn't know what they're doing and screws it up. That never happens, I assure you. I've never screwed anything up in the cloud. They can also be very limiting, though. The ones that are really excellent are the ones that, like, you know, it depends on who their client target is, right? So they can also be very limiting, so that what you can do, like, for instance, Amazon storage stuff tends to be very limiting. There's only a certain subset of things you can do in the storage stuff, whereas with Google, you can do almost anything in their storage stuff. They just don't care. They just want you using it so you can pay them. So you have to be careful, and when you're talking to your users, make sure they understand this, because what happens a lot of the times, at least in a lot of the customers that I've talked to, and some of you that are here listening to me babble again, your users they're not going through a rigorous process when they're selecting a provider. They're just not. Like, you know, if you go buy a firewall, or you're going buying, I don't know, whatever it is you guys buy, usually there's a process, right? You have some vendor selections, you do you know, what is those things I hate? Request for quote or whatever, or request for proposal, that's it, thanks Matt. So you do all those things. That doesn't happen with cloud providers. What happens with the cloud providers is typically an executive goes, you know, we're kind of behind that cloud game. We need to get in the cloud. We need to get in the cloud right now. And, you know, they go to their assistant or their receptionist or whatever, and they go, hey, get us in the cloud. And that's what ends up happening. Nobody consults the IT guy, not on cloud stuff, because I read somewhere we don't need IT people anymore. I don't know where read that. But I'm sure, but that's in their minds, because that's what your managers, that's what your executives are reading. They're going, ha, cloud, I can get rid of all these guys. I can get rid of all these, I can get rid of Dale because I don't need him anymore. I mean, that's what they're thinking. And again, it's our jobs to convince them otherwise, hopefully. So yeah, control panels, they can suck or they can be the greatest thing ever. When you talk to your users about them, make sure they understand what they can and can't do. And that's why it's really important for us to understand what they can and can't do. So that's why I encourage everyone to at least deploy something to the cloud. Amazon and Google both have free tiers, so it won't cost you any money to deploy something. It doesn't matter what it is. Just deploy something. Learn it. Deal with it. One of the other things that comes up a lot with the cloud is so-called reliability because, well, if it's not available, you really can't secure it. So somehow, reliability, redundancy, and those things have become a security function. And that's okay, because we need more to do. We don't have enough. So I always tell people, this is not limited to the quote-unquote cloud. This particular thing that I've learned here can apply really to anything. I mean, you got to keep your network running. You got to keep your Exchange servers going. You got to keep all that stuff working. So this is a computer problem. This is not a cloud problem. So people need to understand that. There's no magic, no magic to this stuff. And again, marketing people, I don't think there's any of them in here, so I can say they're all full of crap. I mean, they just are. They all lie. Everybody knows it. You guys can laugh. It's okay. Actually, there's marketing people in here, but that's okay. You guys are liars, too. I'm just put it out there. And then, I mean, come on, that's their job is to lie, right? So, you take a product that slices bread and you go, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, that's just what you do, and it's okay. I mean, we don't hate you any more than we would normally. But what ends up happening in the cloud, you get these, I get them all the time because I've signed up with all these providers so that I can do talks like this and help you guys when you're deploying stuff. So I get them all the time where it's like, hey, put an app in our cloud and never be down again. How'd that work for Netflix? Not too good. But again, you could do that with the cloud. I mean, you really literally can do that. Most people don't. Even like companies, we talked about this yesterday on our podcast, even most companies like Netflix that, they have billions of dollars at stake, their reputation has taken a huge ding because they were down and Patrick couldn't watch anime one night on Netflix. I'm assuming that's what you were watching. I don't know. I think it's a valid assumption. Just going to put that out there. But it costs a lot of money to do this stuff right. I mean, people wouldn't be surprised because the cloud's cheap. That's a whole other section we'll talk about. But yeah, you have to do something. You can't just put your app out there. And when you're talking to your users, make sure they understand they're not magically getting any more uptime or reliability. They're magically getting something new they have to manage, or, well, probably more likely you'll have to manage because they won't. And my personal experience, I was putting this together. I was writing the article. I was putting this presentation together, and we have an app in the cloud. And if you want to know how I learned this lesson, I'm going to tell you right now. So we have 2 instances of this app because it's a new thing for us. It's only like maybe 2 months old at this point. And so we have our instance, which is where everybody can go and upload some secure files and encrypt them, and life is pretty. And then we have a customer instance that is one of our beta customers. Well, the customer instance was down in Amazon. You could do nothing with it. I could connect to it. That was about it. This was a couple weeks ago when they had their big outage on a Friday night. On our instance, our own private instance and our development instance, they were in a different Amazon zone. No problem. They worked great. Everything was peachy. What did I do wrong? Because again, budgetary constrictions. I'm going, this is a new thing. I am not going to spend tons of money to make it redundant. I'm going to put it in the cloud and hope the cloud providers are better than some other hosting company. Oh, my bad, because they're not. Amazon went down hard, and the whole Virginia B zone was gone. I'll try to avoid a lot of the cloudy talk specific to Amazon, but it was really annoying. We ended up having to rebuild in another zone. Now, that was what was nice about the cloud, was we were able to go, hey, that disk? The disk was fine. There was nothing wrong with the disk. We were able to attach it to another cloud instance, and poof, everything was great. Everything was fine. We changed our address. Life was peachy. But I learned the hard way that, you don't get magic redundancy. You don't get magic uptime with the cloud. You just don't. And I think, at least I hope I'm smarter than the average user. And if I didn't get that lesson, then I'm thinking probably users are going, hey, it's got to be magic, right? It just does. But it's not. There's a lot of things you have to do, and we'll talk about some of them. This is one of my favorite parts. I teach this in my web application security class because a lot of people, again, along the lines of thinking about magic, they think APIs or application programming interfaces are magic, and they're not. So with a brief history of API, I won't go into a lot of detail because, well, if you're talking to your users, they're just not going to care. But basically, you have one structure, right? So you have an operating system. Then you have a way to talk into this operating system. Otherwise, we'd all be writing C or assembly. So you can patch in. Microsoft has probably, I think, upwards of 20 million API calls into their stuff. Linux has it. All the operating systems have it. This crappy Mac has it. So that you can talk to things. When you go to a cloud, it's basically the same thing. I said in my article that if a cloud was a jail, then APIs are the bars. And the reason why that is because your APIs actually are how you do things. If you're using it as a platform, that's how you talk to things. Even if you're running a Linux platform. So for instance, in our app, one of the things we have to do is be able to send email. Well, guess what you can't do out of Amazon EC2 by default? You can't send email. And the reason why is because they have a messaging API. And they charge you like 25 cents per 1,000 messages or something like that. It's not expensive, I assume, unless you send a bazillion messages. So that's how they lock you in. So we actually did request to Amazon that we were allowed to send email. And they said, okay, that was no problem, but it is another step you have to do. Now, if a user's running into that, they're going to go, what is this? I'm just going to, learn how to use the API. Maybe, or they just rewrite their app so it doesn't send email at all. I don't know. But those are the kinds of things you got to watch out for because Amazon has an API for everything. So does Google. So does Microsoft. Well, Microsoft's are a little less defined, but they do have them, and there's an extra charge. But on the plus side, APIs can be really awesome because they can kind of abstract a lot of the crap that you would normally have to write, that you would normally have to do. So as another example, Google has a whole set of APIs that they give away for free. So you have the Google Search API, you have the Google Images API, the Books API, that kind of thing. If you've ever written that stuff, you know it's not terribly well documented. And again, I think their excuse is it's free. So we're not going to document it because it's free. Deal with it. Here's some sample code. It may or may not work, not our problem. I see those guys bobbing their heads, so they must have been writing some Google API stuff. That's okay. I'm not going to say they're all great because they're not. But you can do some pretty cool things with it once you kind of learn how to do it. The other problem with that is that your users can use them too. They can learn how to do these things very easily, and they're not technically savvy in most cases. So they're going to take the sample code, which is very dangerous, and they're just going to use the sample code in production. They just are. I've seen it a million times. Matter of fact, a lot of people do that when it's not in the cloud. Very sad. Every penetration tester will tell you a story or two about sample code. It's just not good. And that's one of the reasons why you should hate them. The other reason, again, is they're expensive. 25 cents per 1,000 emails, that doesn't sound bad at all until you also add the 25 cents per query for the database you're going to use in the cloud. Or the 50 cents per gig or whatever it is. All of a sudden, it adds up. My little cloud app went from $200 a month to do it once we started adding some of the API functions to like $500 a month. So budgetary considerations are really important when you're dealing with API. The other thing is vendor lock-in. If you're using the APIs very, very heavily, it's very, very difficult to move to some other provider. We'll talk a little bit about abstraction layers. If you read the article that was posted, there's a lot of API abstraction layers out there, or at least a few. Apache has one that's allegedly really good, which I'm going to try at some point. But that lets you basically make one API call, and it just handles it and translates it into whatever cloud provider you're on. That's going to get really interesting when we talk a little bit later. The other problem with APIs is security. I mean, obviously. Are they encrypted? You don't know. Obviously you could do a packet capture. in most cases. You could do something to prove that they're encrypted, but a lot of times they're not. Now, after I was done with this, and if I would have changed it, my designer would have killed me. Amazon released multi-factor authentication for their APIs. So you can add even more layers of security on top of that if you want to. Again, it's a little more complicated to use, but it's something for you to actually talk to your users about, make sure they know it even exists. Yes, sir? They just called it multi-factor authentication. I had like 10 minutes to do anything with it, so I didn't get to look at it too much. I think it's Amazon's own thing. Yeah, they don't tend to like bring in that kind of partner, but I could be wrong. So, but you really should get to know the APIs because again, your users are going to use them. They just are. The other thing I learned is firewalls in the cloud are dead, right? I mean, that seems to be the prevailing theory. I don't need a firewall. I'm in the cloud. Everything's peachy. And, you know, in some cases, I go both ways on this. Sometimes I go, you know what, firewalls are great things to have in the cloud. And other times I go, you know, I just don't care. It just depends on the thing, right? So it bothers me that a lot of firewall vendors now, they have something that runs in the cloud. Checkpoint, Juniper, Cisco, you pick them, it doesn't matter. They all have something. And the problem I have with it is in most cases, it's just a firewall that you're running at work. There's nothing special about it for the cloud, really. It's just, you know, it's not technically a VMware image, but it kind of is. It's, you know, Amazon's AMI image, and you just upload it and off you go, because I think most of them only work on Amazon, so I can be safe by talking about Amazon there. So they're definitely not dead. One of the cool things about that is a lot of these firewalls now have intrusion prevention built in, which is a big problem in a lot of things. So you could make that leap and actually do some intrusion prevention in your cloud, which I can tell you from experience almost no one is doing, including, by the way, the providers of the cloud services. Because remember, they're providing the cloud services, they're stepping away. That's it. That's their whole job. And make sure your users get that. Make sure they completely 100% grok that. Because a lot of them think Amazon's their friend. They think Google, oh, they don't do evil, right? So they must be okay. They don't care about the safety of your stuff. Now, to their credit, you don't hear a lot about this cloud was breached today, or that cloud was breached today, or the Amazon infrastructure is completely breached, and everyone, you don't hear a lot about that. You hear, hey, somebody got a SQL injection into some application. Again, same problems you have already. They're just in a cloud now. They're just not your infrastructure problems. Some of the benefits are you could provide a lot of that protection. You can do a lot of the things that you're already hopefully doing, at least some of you are doing. I know some of you aren't, on your regular networks. So that's a pretty good thing. The pitfalls, there's a lot of those. One is performance. Again, these firewall things, they aren't terribly custom to the cloud, so they're not really designed to run on a virtual infrastructure. So their performance can be a little wanting. They can lack quite a bit. The other one is cost, not just the license cost, but the cost to run them, the CPU cycles that you're renting from the cloud provider, the disk, everything, the memory, everything you need to run that firewall correctly, you're paying a little extra for on top of it. So a lot of budgetary concerns when you're dealing with the cloud. And the biggest cautionary tale I can give you is that, well, there's not a lot, because quite frankly, nobody does this. I don't know why all these firewall vendors are running around screaming, oh, buy my cloud firewall, buy my cloud firewall. Nobody's doing it because it's too expensive. They're relying on Amazon to do it. I would challenge a lot of the firewall vendors to show me some instances where they've deployed these things. I bet they don't have any. But anyway, don't get me started on firewall vendors. We'll be here all day. So we talked a little bit about it, about downtime, but redundancy in the cloud is not magic at all. You still have to plan for redundancy and availability. So how do you plan for that? Well, one of the things you do is load balance, obviously. Amazon, believe me, they'll sell you a whole service where you can load balance across all their data centers. So that's pretty cool. We talked a little bit about marketing people that lie, so it's not magic. You don't get redundancy. One of the working theories I have is that load balancing across one provider is pretty cool. But what I really want to be able to do is load balance across multiple providers. That would be mega awesome cool. So when you're doing that, again, you'd have to rewrite your app to be entirely abstracted, right? So it wouldn't be able to rely on a provider's API or any of that stuff. No one's doing that, by the way, but that's like my dream world. So I can have all this cheap cloud stuff and balance across multiple places. Yes, sir?
There's a couple of storage companies that are starting to do that.
Cool.
StoreSimple has one they call it Cloud RAID.
Oh, okay.
So RAID Google, Amazon, and Azure.
That's awesome. I know that, like, what's the name of it? Jungle Disk will do that. It's a lot easier to do with disk than it is with an actual application. Yeah, exactly. But I would like to see it for applications. That would be, one step, like I don't know, for lack of a better term, a middleman provider where you write everything to their API and they distribute it and they host it out. That'd be a good business idea. Somebody start that business. I'll be a customer. So yeah, redundancy isn't magic. And this sounds like the uptime, downtime section, but that's because this stuff is really important and you need to really drive it home to your users. You need to make sure they get this stuff. My personal favorite section, encrypt early, encrypt often. I mean, seriously, just encrypt the stuff. It's not that hard. One of the cloud principles is this concept of multi-tenancy. That's how they make their money, right? They host a bunch of stuff or people's stuff on one or two, three, smaller pieces of physical hardware. What guarantees do you have that that data is not intermingling, that that data is not, somewhere else? You don't have a lot at all. So you should definitely make sure you encrypt that stuff. I wrote something called LogSup not terribly long ago, a few months ago. And I was really proud of myself. I was being clever. We needed to put some logs in the cloud, and I needed to encrypt them because I couldn't just throw them up there because I didn't know what, you don't ever know what's necessarily in your logs. So I wrote this thing, it PGP encrypts it. I kept the key, life was pretty, life was wonderful, I was awesome. It uploaded it to Amazon, it wrote a little receipt into their database, it was great, it was awesome. 2 days later, Amazon released their automatic encryption stuff that was way better than the crap I had written. I was really, really mad. So that's the other thing, make sure your users understand they got to keep current on this stuff. They have to make sure they know because it'll change just like that. But Amazon doesn't announce things until they're out there. So, literally they announced it and it was there that day and I looked at it and I was, son of a bitch. I have to rework it. So we talked about that. But the same can be said, by the way, of all your VMwares and whatever your infrastructure is. The exact same thing can be said for that, right? So you put a private cloud up there, and your users are doing stuff. You don't know what data they have, really. You don't know if it's intermingling. So encrypting the disk at the disk level is a really good idea. Again, just to keep people from snooping. I mean, that's the number one reason you encrypt anything. Another lesson to drive home to your users is that encryption is not security. Just because you're encrypting it doesn't mean you don't have to do all the other stuff. It just means it's another layer of protection, and people should do that. Another funny myth is that cloud is cheap. So infrastructure as a service, this is we'll talk some definitions, and the cheat sheet that eventually my lovely assistant Patrick will hand out goes into the stuff. So infrastructure is basically where here's a piece of hardware, basically a virtual piece of hardware. Go install some stuff on it, do some things. You're responsible for everything. And that's where the vendor kind of steps back. Platform as a service is here's your operating system or here's your API, go do things. That's cool. Software as a service, this is where you'll see, this will be the bulk of where your users are going to be doing cloud stuff. This is I don't know, Salesforce.com and Basecamp, if anybody in here uses that as project management. Gmail's a big one in that game. This is where your users can go, get an account, life is good, everything's happy, and now they have whatever service it is. They don't have to do anything but give them a credit card number and their email address, and that's it. Man, all of life should be that easy. So you have to make sure you understand the cost versus benefit, because I can tell you from personal experience, just email by itself, for my little 20-something person company, is incredibly expensive to do. We're a very email-intensive sort of place. So it was so much cheaper when I outsourced that because I didn't have to run a mail server anymore. I didn't have to go burn through disk. I didn't have to do anything. And I still maintain some control because I can encrypt things to the cloud. I don't have to worry about it. So sensitive things get encrypted, other things don't. So it's great. we've had no downtime. Oh, God, no downtime since we did it. But when we were hosting it, you know, you burn through a disk, server crash, did this and that. Nah, I don't care about any of that. It's great. That was the cost versus benefit. Now, there's a third dimension to that, right? And that's risk. You know, if you're a government agency that's sending diplomatic secrets across borders, maybe you don't want that hosted in Gmail. Just putting that out there. That's not what we do. So, and again, all the, you know, our customer interactions and things like that, we host that because we consider that pretty secret. So the cloud is cheap it is pretty cheap comparatively, depending on what you're doing with it. Other times it's not, and you have to be aware of that. Make sure your users are aware of that so they're not completely shocked when they get a horrible bill. One of the other things is you can't get any logs in the cloud. Oh, you can't do anything. Yes, you can. You can absolutely get your logs from the cloud, especially if you're running like a full API, like if you're just not doing the API stuff and you're running an EC2 instance, those logs are the same logs that you'd have locally. Don't believe that. That's FUD. It's total FUD. And you can actually analyze them too, and there's a lot of places that'll do it for you for a price in the cloud. Isn't that awesome of them? So you can send your cloud logs over to Loggly. Loggly is just a little provider, and they have little API scripts that'll send your logs on over to them. There's also SplunkStorm, if you know what Splunk is. They have a cloud offering where it's not terribly mature or robust yet, but they have it. And you can basically have a Splunk instance in the cloud, and you can have your logs up there. So don't believe people when they tell you that. Again, data logs, you know, operating system logs are as good as the operating system logs programmers. The biggest issue everyone has, and you have this locally, you just may not be aware, your programmers, your developers aren't writing their applications to log correctly. So you know, this whole myth that, oh, I have to have logs to do this, you probably have a bigger problem than you think. So you really need to, again, in a non-confrontational manner, discuss that with your users. Make sure they're writing some logging into their code. And again, the biggest problem though is when you're doing the API stuff, when you're doing all of that, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all those, they don't really care because the API stuff they're taking care of, they're handling. So they don't care what you think. They don't care what you feel. They don't care if they hurt your feelings. They're not your friend. So they don't necessarily feel obligated to give you the logs. So that's what you should expect. What you shouldn't expect is to have the log message that says there's something wrong with the cloud and then actually have the cloud provider fix it. You should never expect that because it's never going to happen. Eventually, whatever problem will work its way out of the system. That's how they feel about it. It kind of sucks, but that's the way they are. So Matt told me I should take this out of the presentation. I didn't because this is a presentation for users, not us. We understand that service level agreements are important across all aspects, but they're really important in the cloud. And they're really important in the cloud because this is how the cloud provider will decide how they deliver your services. This is uptime, redundancy guarantees, or any of that kind of stuff. And in the cheat sheet, it goes into a little more detail about that. This is also where you get compensation for a violation of the SLA. So this is where they go, hey, we're not really responsible for your monetary loss, but we'll refund $20 of your fee or whatever it is if we violate our SLA. Some examples are in the cheat sheet because I'm really lazy and didn't put them in the presentation. Also, I would have been killed. So that's it for the top 10 or 10-ish things. Some of the other stuff that you need to make sure you drive home with your users is monitoring. A lot of you are doing a really miserable job of monitoring on your own networks, so you're probably not paying too much attention to the cloud. You need to. You need to make sure, you know, is it up? They all have these really cool-looking, fancy schmancy dashboards. Google's, funny enough, the guys in the back are going to make fun of me again. Google actually has an API where you can talk to theirs, and you can pull that data down into your own alerting system. So if you have Icinga or Nagios or something, you can pull the Google API stuff down, and their dashboard will go, hey, I'm down or I'm up. I have found that in 90% of the times when there's a problem I'm having in the cloud or there's just some general issue, the dashboards are liars. They're like marketing people. They just are. And that's because, by the way, IT people in general are bad at monitoring. The cloud providers are no different. Their monitoring just isn't set up correctly to find out whatever the problem is and then report it. So you kind of have to expect, you know, some sort of false positives, some sort of worse false negatives where it's telling you everything is peachy, but it really isn't. So don't believe it. Run your own monitoring. Make sure you're double checking that stuff. It'll cost you a little extra money, but it'll be worth it in the long run. I put a section in here for Amazonian law, which is Amazon's, my term for Amazon's SLA and basically their terms of engagement with their customers. So Amazonian law basically tells you what you can and can't do, like the email thing and some other stuff you can and can't do. There's probably 200 different things. Amazon's one of the nice ones, though. They actually, for free, will give you a firewall in front of a packet filtering firewall in front of your instance. Most of the cloud providers don't do that, so it's one of the reasons I like them. Google App Engine is another thing. They just announced an update to this at their little Google I/O event, where it's going to basically become more like Amazon. I don't know that you'll ever run across this with your users, because again, it's really a geek, hardcore sort of geek kind of cloud engine. So you're probably not going to run across it too much with your users, but if you do, now you know it exists. But there are some uses for that stuff, especially for security guys. Password cracking's a great one, because now you don't have to have, 27 PlayStation 3s or whatever it is clustered together to crack things. You can go get an Amazon instance, a GPU instance. You'll pay like 50 cents for it to, crack 1 million passwords, or, the most recent password leakage files, which was like yesterday, I think, with Yahoo and all those people. Oh, right, you don't even have to. Thank you. You don't even have to do that. Some of them you might have to crack, though. Like, I don't know. I read this morning Fandroid was cracked, too. I think their passwords were at least encrypted, but I don't quote me on that one. So yeah, password cracking, brute force kinds of stuff. Penetration testing is another great one, because you can have a pretty powerful pen test box if you need to brute force something or do some other computationally difficult task. You just put it up in the cloud and actually run it, and off you go. I don't necessarily encourage you to do that, because penetration tests should be treated as sensitive data, and you really shouldn't have that up there in a public cloud. But I can tell you, it's really cool. And then for your users, a more valid use is QA testing, dev sites, those sorts of things, because you can make them cheaper without all the redundancy, and life is good. And then auditing, I don't know why I put this in there, but you could make your auditors do things in the cloud, and that way they're talking to your network externally, and everything looks peachy. So that's all I've got. I did make this under the Creative Commons, so you're welcome to ask me for this presentation. I will give it to you. You can tear it apart, do whatever you want to with it, and use it to present to your users. If there's no questions, then my lovely assistant Patrick will pass out the cheat sheets. You guys can use those. There's a link on the cheat sheets so that you could download the digital version, also Creative Commons, so you could tear that apart and use it with your users too. So yeah, go pass them out, Patrick. Yes, sir.
One thing that I noticed that may be more of a threat in the future is the Windows Azure stuff. They just released their web pages product where you can very easily push out web applications.
Oh yeah. Front page for the cloud. Yeah. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. The only benefit we have there is Microsoft has not been able to successfully make Azure work. So they do. But actually, when you get the cheat sheets, it might be on the front or back, depending on the way Patrick's passing it out. Read the language of their uptime guarantees. It's really fascinating. What we did was we just took the uptime guarantees to show people what the trickiness is. Amazon's and Google's basically said, we guarantee it's going to be up for this time. Microsoft says, well, we sort of guarantee it if you do these 10 things. And it's kind of funny, so look it over. All right. Well, thanks for listening to me babble. I appreciate everybody's time. Look at that. What did I tell you? 10:47.
We'll have Bill Semp for Locksport starting in about 10 minutes. Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot, Bill.